Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network analyst, and he's out at the Combine. NFL Network, the Scouting Combine kicks off today at 3 Eastern on NFL Network, where they look at defensive linemen and linebackers. Segue to Jalen Carter, since he's not there any longer. Daniel, what kind of questions left the building when Jalen Carter left?
Well, I think there's a lot to be answered. I did see something online a few minutes ago, Dan, where it said that he was headed on his way back here to meet with teams. So I don't know if that's an accurate report or not, but I did see that floating around on the internet. But this is just it's an awful situation. It's a tragedy, obviously, with what resulted there, and it's very serious, and it's being taken very serious by teams. The one thing is there's time here between now and the draft, and if you're going to draft Jalen Carter, you're going to be spending a lot of time with him between now and then, and you're going to be doing a lot of digging to see what else is there, because this is troubling would be a gross understatement.
And it's a sliding scale of how much baggage and how good you are. Jalen Carter, by all accounts, is a top 5 pick, maybe number 1 overall. Where do you have him in your mock draft?
Yeah, he's my number 1 player in the whole draft, Dan. I think he's the best football player in the country. So, he's as good as it gets in this year, and he plays a position where, if you talk about scarcity, it's hard to find interior guys with his ability. There's a lot of really talented edge rushers that come into the league each and every year. The number of dominant defensive tackles that can really mess things up from a run and pass standpoint, those guys are hard to find. He's a rare talent.
How would you assess the quarterback draft if you were going to grade it to or compare it to previous drafts?
I don't think there's that, the slam dunk guy where we've had years. I mean, Joe Burrow from start to finish, you felt real comfortable that he was going to be a really good player. He was the best one. Trevor Lawrence, the same way. We saw that years coming, and he was just, they were clean, They checked every box in terms of the size and the skill set and everything you need from the position. I think these guys this year, I think they're really gifted. I think they're really talented. I would say there's 5 of them I think will end up being starting quarterbacks, which is a huge number in draft. So from that standpoint, it's really good, but they're all, they all come with a varying level of risk, and it's whatever risk you're comfortable taking. It's different with each of them.
If Caleb Williams was available in this draft, what would the Chicago Bears do with the number 1 pick?
Well, I've seen enough of him. I haven't done, the big workup on him, but I've seen enough to know that when guys like that come into the draft, you take them and you move on from whoever else is in the building.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know about Bryce Young, and I did have an NFL scout to say that he wasn't all in on Justin Fields to begin with, and if you have somebody you truly love, then take them because you reset that quarterback clock. If you ran the Bears, knowing these prospects, what would you do with the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, I'm going to take you on a winding road here, because the first part of that question is, who do you like better? Do you like Justin Fields better, or do you like Bryce Young? Personally, I have a higher grade on Bryce Young. And so then the follow-up question is, well, then great, you ought to take Bryce Young and you should trade Justin Fields. But to me, I think the underrated aspect of the evaluation of quarterbacks, Dan, is the fit. And I just don't like the fit of Bryce Young in Chicago. I just don't think it works. I can make a strong case for him.
But explain that to me, though, Daniel. The fit as far as weather, style. I mean, what goes into this?
So, look, I scouted for a couple teams in the AFC North, okay? And when we were looking at quarterbacks, we wanted bigger guys, more physical guys. If you go back at that time, you had Ben Roethlisberger and Carson Palmer in the division. The Ravens end up ultimately getting Joe Flacco. But the feeling was, you're playing in a physical division. You're playing outdoor and weather and wind and all the elements. It just, you wanted a more physical guy to hold up in there. It's a different game when you play indoors. I just look at Bryce. I think of, how everything is crisp and on time. Get the ball out. When you have indoor field, you've got indoor footing. Timing is it's a lot easier there. And I think all of his strengths play well in that environment and that, in that AFC South with either Houston or Indy.
Yeah, and speaking of which, Justin Fields actually fits the Chicago Bears style.
He does.
When you
he might not like the cold weather, but he fits it.
And I'm curious about C.J. Stroud because I was watching the Georgia game, and all of a sudden I would show that to every scout and just say, every team, look at this, break down C.J. Stroud.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Dan, because, I had kind of a grade on him, a certain grade on him. I watched him over the summer coming into the season, and I liked him, but, gosh, I just wish there was a little more suddenness or urgency or like a playmaking aspect to his game. I think he's just a pure thrower. I mean, it is fun to watch the ball come off his hand. He can make every type of throw, but free rusher, you get an unblocked guy. I wanted to see him, create and make some plays. And in basketball, I guess the analogy would be he was more of a shooter than a scorer, and he just didn't really have that element. So then I'm watching throughout the season, and I'm like, okay, I think his arm's gotten a little bit stronger, so I like that, but not enough to move him up off of my grade that I already have. And you watch him throughout the whole year, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of a DNA match. He's the same guy. He's not changing. I know exactly what he is. And then I turn on the semifinal game, and I go, wait a second, who's this?
I know,
and that's the old adage in scouting, Dan. It's like if you can do it once, you can do it. So it's in there. So one of the things I'd be curious, I'm curious to see how healthy he was during the year, and then maybe it was just as simple as when you're Ohio State, you don't play many teams that can put you in positions to have to do that. Well, Georgia can make you move around a little bit. So I moved him up. I moved him up after that game because I know it's in there.
Are you more concerned about Bryce Young's height or his weight?
Yeah, I would say the frame, just the frame, just being a narrow framed, lighter, the height. I think he had 2 or 3 balls tipped that, that doesn't show up as an issue. There's times where maybe a couple times on tape I can say, okay, I don't think he saw this guy. But when you have a strong enough arm, and he does, it's not he doesn't have a Matthew Stafford type arm, not a Mahomes type arm, but it's plenty good enough. When you're a little undersized, one of the things they've been able to do, and I think it started really with Russell Wilson, is they get so much depth in their drop so that you can just create distance between you and the line of scrimmage. Helps you see. Drew Brees always had that awesome interior. The center and the 2 guards were always really good. You invested in those guys, and they kept that space and that distance for him to be able to see. So I think he can navigate around that. One of the interesting things, I was talking to a team the other day, and I hadn't thought of this part of it. And he said, so if you love Bryce Young, but your question is the durability, he said, well, then why don't you go invest maybe a little bit more than you'd like to in the backup quarterback, knowing that he's probably going to have to play 2 or 3 games a year, and
I don't want to hear that.
But Dan, that's a way where you kind of get your cake and eat it too. If you're getting 14 games of high level quarterback play, and you got to give them a week here or there in a 17 game season, I'd rather have that than sacrifice the talent at the position and roll somebody out there who's not as good for 17 weeks.
Talking to Daniel Jeremiah, former NFL scout, and he's an analyst for the NFL Network. Scouting Combine kicks off today at 3 Eastern on NFL Network. Well, if that's the case, then would I use that same blueprint for Kyler Murray? Would I use it for Lamar Jackson? These quarterbacks who are not going to make it through 17 games, they're going to be nicked up.
Fields in there. Okay. Yeah, put Fields in there as well. If you're going to rely on these guys, it's 2 different things. One of them is the size factor, and the other one is guys that really like to use their legs and be a part of it. So if those 2 cases show up, I think there is wisdom in investing in that backup quarterback.
If you ran the Seahawks, what would you do with that 5th overall pick?
That's a great call. They have been doing a lot of work on quarterbacks. I know, that I'm sure they don't want to get Geno done, but I think even if they do get Geno done, I don't think that would preclude them from taking one. Thinking they could get the guy of the future. I would say if you have a quarterback that you love in this draft, if you're the Seahawks, I wouldn't let the fact that you've got a guy coming off of a Pro Bowl season and Geno Smith deter you from taking one. But the way he played last year, the way they've got some pretty good young pieces on this team. I know usually when you have a defensive-minded head coach and they watch a crappy defense all season long, Dan, that's you get on a one-track mind there and say, I just can't stomach watching a front 7 like this anymore. I've got to get some difference makers.
Would you take a running back in the top 10?
The only team I would do it for is the team that has a less than 0% chance of doing it, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Just because their roster's in such great shape. You're never going to take a running back over a pass rusher if you don't have pass rushers. You're never going to take one over a quarterback, a left tackle. Like, they have all those key positions filled. And you can add depth, obviously, and fortify them. But I just think with their roster, as close as they were to winning a Super Bowl, and then you take Bijan Robinson, who's as talented a back as we've seen in a long time, is right up there with all those top guys that have gone up there in the previous generation when we used to care about running backs. I think you put him in that offense with Hurts, with those two receivers, with Goddard, and all of a sudden you throw Bijan Robinson in there. That might be the piece to push you over the top. That being said, I work there. I know Howie Roseman really well, and it'll never happen.
I would think Buffalo. Buffalo would be the team that I don't think they can get him, but Buffalo having him.
Oh, he'd be a home run.
Yeah.
He'd be a home run. He's a great player.
I'll circle back to what the original topic. Would you draft Jalen Carter? Hi.
I would want to know a lot more information before I would be comfortable doing that. As great as he is, Dan, I know that you're not going to have everybody that has a perfectly clean sheet in terms of their background. That's not realistic. And guys make mistakes, and remember, these guys are young. But this is not a small ordeal. This resulted in the loss of life, and that would be very difficult for me personally.
Always great to talk to you. Have fun out there. We appreciate your time, Daniel.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you.
That's Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network, and former NFL scout for two teams, Eagles and the Ravens.